Kwe, Upsalad. Hello, welcome. My name is Neil. I'm the Faculty Excellence Developer here at the Maple League, and I'm so excited for this session. I'm joining you today from Kutubuktuk, also called Halifax, in unceded Mi'kma'ki, and I'm really excited to welcome you to Open Educational Resources, Strategies for Engaging Students with Erin Mazerolle. Dr. Mazerolle is an assistant professor of psychology at St. Francis Xavier University, where she runs the Mazerolle Lab, which uses advanced brain imaging techniques to understand interactions between brain function and blood supply in the healthy brain and neurological disease. Incredible. Just this month, that lab was awarded a Canadian Foundation for Innovation grant, which is really exciting. So I hope you will join me in welcoming Dr. Mazerolle. Take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Things are not quite where they were when we practiced here. Everybody can see my screen okay? Looks good. Okay, I'm so excited to share with you all some of the things that we've been doing at StFX, and that we're starting to collaborate with other institutes as well on open educational resources. And I think probably everyone here probably already knows, this probably can move to it. Probably already knows that open educational resources are good for students, and there's lots of well-documented and evidenced reasons why that's true, but they're also good for instructors too. And you might know that too, but I'm going to give some examples of why and how they've worked really well for me. So just to give you a little bit of context about where I'm coming from here, I never taught before 2020, 2021. I had done a few guest lectures, but I was coming from a research intensive postdoc. I'd done student mentoring, but to be in charge of a whole course, this was the first time I had done this when I started my position at St. Francis Xavier University. And both of the courses that I was assigned had previously been taught with commercial textbooks, and the instructors that had taught them previously were extremely generous with sharing their materials with me, which was an amazing help. And in the fall semester, I used the established commercial textbook for the advanced statistics class I was teaching. I'm in the psychology department there. But in the winter semester, I found an open educational resource for the beginner statistics class. So the reason I did that, and I'll be honest that the story that I tell about why I got into open educational resources has changed and evolved a little bit. And so if I'm telling a different story, I've just gotten a little bit more comfortable with being honest with why I did this. And so what I would say now really happened, and who knows, maybe I'll change the story in the future. But and that should be 2020. In the fall of 2020, when I first started teaching, the StFX bookstore did not receive enough copies of the textbook that I had ordered, and they were back ordered. And the bookstore was taking my students' money and not giving them a textbook. And they weren't able to tell them when the textbooks would come in, and they didn't direct them to any of the other possibilities, such as the ebook, which was available for a cheaper price, or the fact that the textbooks were available on Amazon. They just took my students' money and didn't give them a book. And students were stressed. It was the fall of 2020, so students were stressed, period. And then I had students in this advanced statistics course, which was, fairly well, I don't want to say feared, but not students' favorite course to take in the psychology department at StFX, and they couldn't get their textbook. And so basically I was angry Googling to try to solve this problem for my students. And that's how I found out about open educational resources. And how I got a little bit more comfortable with this much more, I don't know, like personal view of this story is I was reading a recent paper on faculty perspectives, and someone shared a similar story. To prepare for the upcoming semester, the lead faculty on this other research that I'm not involved in visited the bookstore to pick up the newest edition of the textbook she had been using. She reported being appalled. It was $130 for a book that didn't have any binding, no cover, and it had 2 different sets of page numbers. So I think that these stories kind of highlight that although, commercial textbooks have been used for a really long time and have a lot of advantages, there can be some really, really big disadvantages. And having a little bit of control over the textbook that you share with your students is one way to sort of address those disadvantages. And so the open educational resources that we found to use in our class at first year, I'm sharing here. They were adapted by Matthew Crump, or adapted from Matthew Crump, I should say, who's at the University of New York. And he has a fantastic series of open educational resources for psychology classes, especially research methods and statistics and cognitive psychology. And so we've adapted these. I host them on my own personal website. And I can talk a little bit about like the under the hood piece if we have time at the end. But I have my lab instructor here, Sherry Neville-McLean, up, and she's in the audience here today as well. And I really cannot stress enough how much I could not have done this without Sherry. It was really a joint effort to adopt these open educational resources for our class, particularly the lab manual, which is the second link here. It simply would not happen if not for the two of us working together and Sherry's openness and willingness to try something different and learn so many skills to make this happen. And I think that open educational resources are really inherently collaborative, and that's another reason that I kind of gravitate to them. And so I think we really proved that to be true as we adopted these resources for our beginner statistics class here at StFX in the psychology department. There's other statistics classes offered in other departments. So what did we do? How did this work? I really just Googled it. I found one that I liked and got started. For the textbook, I did really minor things. I basically copied Matt Crump's book and fixed a few broken images and typos and got it to the point that it was good enough, which I feel like is a fairly good slogan for using open educational resources. They're good enough. You just have to get it so it's good enough. And that's a really good lesson also for an early career teacher who hasn't taught before, the value of good enough. And I think using OERs helped me learn that more broadly in my teaching. The lab manual, I worked with Sherry to update each activity as we went through the semester to make sure that it worked for our particular learning objectives, the particular software we were using to teach the students, and also to start to try to integrate some more local content. And I think that the effort that we put in once we had the technical skills down to do the actual updating was similar to the effort you might, expend updating your slides every year. It was really in the range of what I think people are doing anyway. But there is like that kind of learning curve at the beginning, and I don't want to de-emphasize that because it exists, it's there, and it can be a barrier. So the pros of using an open educational resource as I've seen them are that they're customizable and very easy to update once you've got those baseline skills down. They're free and accessible. Students like them. I'm going to share some anecdotes from my own classes about that, but also the research shows that students like them. And they're a really good starting point if you want to try something different. And this is really well articulated in this blog post, and there's a reference to it at the end of my slides if anyone's interested, about how using OERs is like teaching with a jetpack. You can go so much further faster by using open educational resources as a starting point. There is effort to fix and maintain and update them, and that's going to usually be on the part of the instructor, although I have some other ways to update and maintain OERs that I'll share as well. I wouldn't say that there's any real incentive, like external incentive to use them. I'm not sure how well they're considered in things like tenure and promotion evaluations and that kind of thing. There's certainly nothing explicit in the collective agreement here at StFX, for example, for how open educational resources are valued. The biggest con, which I think might also go in a pro in a lot of cases, is it's a change from previous practice. And this has been the biggest stumbling block for me Where it can really come into play is if you're teaching a class with multiple sections and maybe there's not sufficient interest from the professors teaching other sections to make this change. A lot of commercial textbooks come with things like auto-graded homework assignments, which open educational resources may not. And so those kinds of bells and whistles, which can be good for students and instructors, can definitely prevent adopting OERs. Another issue that's come up a lot is what I'm going to call copyright related anxiety. So it can feel very uncomfortable to literally make a copy of someone else's textbook and make a few changes and say, okay, this is a textbook for my class. And so like an understanding of licenses and Creative Commons and open source, open access things can really help. And the librarians at your institutions can definitely help with that at all. And the librarians here have been an amazing resource for me. And so most of the time, I mean, we still need to have some kind of like baseline level of copyright anxiety so that we're not plagiarizing or stealing things. But most of the time, just being more aware of what the licenses are can kind of help deal with that potential barrier. So I was pretty pleased after my first semester using the open educational resources with the feedback that I received from students. I had 75 students and 33 of them filled out a little survey for me that I asked them to do in addition to the course evaluations. The course evaluations here at StFX are not very specific. So if you want to know like about a specific thing, whether it worked in your course, you end up having to do kind of a separate survey. And so I had 69% of my students somewhat or completely agree that they learned from the textbook, but a whopping 91% of students somewhat or completely agreed that they learned from the lab manual. This is a course that actually didn't have a lab manual at all. We weren't replacing a lab manual. The lab manual was a new feature, and it was a huge success. Again, through the efforts of Sherry Neville-McLean to make it work. And we very quickly produced something that students really liked. And some more feedback from students. So these are, mostly unsolicited emails or comments from surveys. So when I clicked on the link to view the ebook on Moodle, I was amazed that the entire book was available to me free of charge. I enjoyed the online lab manual and textbook, and they were quite helpful to read before class. They're reading before class. How amazing is that? Was there anything else you liked? The lab manual was offered as an answer to that question. And then I actually got this email from a former student. I was doing some personal finance stuff on Excel and wanted to implement some graphs and remembered about how we learned about them in detail in class and how the manual had Excel as well as SPSS. I also figured it would be a useful tool in my future psychology classes / psychology research / classes. That was really great to hear that the skills that they were learning in our OER was extending outside of the classroom. But this isn't a cure-all for every negative student comment. So, students did, at least one student said they didn't find the textbook helpful. So, there's you're not going to please everyone with any one solution, and just wanted to be transparent about that. So as like a quick math, this is the funniest math ever. Don't actually do this math, but just myself in only 2.5 years, and we did get some grants to do some of these projects, we've saved students $28,000 in textbook costs. And so I think, and the way that these, thanks for the, I like that, Margaret, I see your icon there. These savings are going to continue on, well after the grants are like long closed, right? So, we kind of expect the savings to go up, whereas the costs of making them are not going to increase, linearly with that savings. So I was really happy to quickly do that number. The other thing is I teach fairly small classes. Like I teach a couple of sections of 40 students or one section of 20 students. Like, these are small classes. And so obviously the savings can go up really, really fast for larger classes. This is just me. And they're not just textbooks. So I've been involved in creating new syllabi or expanding on syllabi that are kind of posted as open educational resources. I have all of my assignment guidelines and rubrics that I've made up on my website that people could download if they want to start from there. You can find question banks and videos, H5P exercises for those of you who are familiar with that kind of interactive learning language, programming language, and 3D printed items. So this is a new thing that, so this shape here is, I think it's half of a ligand receptor pair. So we literally just printed this today, and the design came from Jen Stamp's group. Jen is here today as well. And it's designed to teach, it was originally designed to teach a visually impaired student about how neurotransmitters bind to receptors, but obviously it has great potential for learning outside of just an accessibility and inclusion perspective. And I'm hoping to actually use it for outreach to teach high school students about the brain. And so we're starting to get this printed off in the Convergence Lab here at StFX, which is run by Dr. James Hughes. But I really should have a picture up of Jen as well on this slide, because that's where the the student that she was working with, that's where the 3D printed design came from, that we just grabbed it off their GitHub and we're able to print it here. So we're really excited about that, although I don't think it printed correctly yet. It's a work in progress. But you can see, like, sometimes I think we think a little bit narrowly about what an open educational resource is. It's not just online textbooks, lots of different forms of educational materials that we can share and collaborate on. So I'd like to share now some models or ideas, not 3D printed models, but other types of models for making open educational resources work for you. And so, like, a big thing to keep an eye out for are what grants are available to get you started, because a little bit of money to hire a lab instructor, which is what I did when we first got started. We hired Sherry to work in the summer. Our lab instructors at StFX are laid off in the summer, and it's I think an enormous waste of human resource potential. So you can use a grant to hire a lab instructor or a student, and hiring a student is a fantastic way to get the student voice incorporated into the open educational resource. One thing that we did with the grant is host a hackathon. So this was a really fun activity. So we hosted a hackathon at this year's Science Atlantic Undergraduate Psychology Conference. Participants spent half a day with us virtually hacking the open educational resource that's used for first-year psychology and neuroscience at Dalhousie University, which Leanne Stevens is the editor of, and also works closely with Jen Stamp on contributing to that open educational resource. And so this was a really neat event that also was organized by a team at StFX that was helping with the Science Atlantic conference more broadly as well. Dr. Erin Austin and Jesse Husk, who since moved on, and Lindsay Berrigan. And so what we did is we had a Teams page here where we met the students and had a couple of little workshops on what open educational resources were, what are the differences between contributing to commercial textbooks versus open educational resources, how do the licenses work and authorship work and that kind of thing. And then we gave them some different themes to consider working on and split them up into smaller groups and kind of just let them have at it. So I'll just show you a little bit about what we did. So this is the textbook that is used. So actually, if we go, can we go to this is the text. So you can see it's edited by Leanne Stevens, and you can download it or you can just read it. And what we did was we used a tool called Hypothesis, which is a browser plugin, Chrome plugin, where you can annotate websites, and you can annotate them like in public so everyone can see them, or we made a private group so that it was kind of just for us. And so you can see us testing some comments here. But as you go through the book, you go to contents and look at one of the chapters that folks worked on, you can see we have our participants making comments about specific parts of the text, where they think things could be improved, where they think things could be expanded, modernized, made more inclusive, that kind of thing. And so all of this is, recorded in our private hypothesis group. You could also do a public one. And then we can go back after the hackathon and make the changes, or at least reflect on the changes and think about how we can improve the open educational resource as a result of all of this amazing feedback and thinking that the students did collaboratively during the event. And so so what we did, like how we actually did this is that we had a grant from AtlanticOER, which we used for partially for prizes. So we gave prizes for the groups that made the most impactful contributions. We gave a prize for the student who just made the highest number of contributions. And actually that's quite easy to add up using this hypothesis tool. But mostly we used the grant so that we could say to the participants of the hackathon, we've got a little chunk of money to implement your suggestions. So, whatever it is that you think needs to be done, like maybe we need to hire a photographer and a model to make a certain, figure more inclusive, or we need to hire an artist to make a new figure, or we need to just hire a student to edit some of the text, which is what we ended up doing. So we were able to tell them that we were going to be able to actually take an action based on their efforts. And so I think it was a really successful event. It was also just super fun and super interesting to see what the students and participants picked up on in terms of, what might need to be, what could be changed to improve it, or what they already liked. And I would say that this is I really like this first year textbook that they're using at Dal, that Jen and Leanne are using at Dal, and I hope that we consider an open educational resource for first year psych here at StFX the next time they consider changing the textbook. We did end up recently going with a different commercial textbook. But one of the things that I really like that they've done at Dal is they've incorporated a lot of and are actively working on incorporating a lot of local information, getting Indigenous perspectives from the Mi'kmaq students, and I think there's a current ongoing project to get some more Black Nova Scotian perspectives into the textbook. And I think that's a great example, especially with the Indigenous piece as a something that we can do towards reconciliation in education. And it's very difficult to do that, with a commercial textbook. You'd have to get a publisher involved, or we can really just take this action and hopefully make a positive change with an open educational resource. So this was some of the feedback that we got from the hackathon. So 100% of the attendees who completed our survey indicated they'd come back to another OER hackathon. So I thought that was great. One comment I wanted to highlight is the reason this person said they'd come back is because it was a great experience in learning about my own potential in psychology. I have had several self-doubt moments where I felt I did not fit in psychology, but participating where I could help, helped me gain the confidence that I needed. And so reading that comment again, just in preparing this slide, made me think that maybe something called OER-enabled pedagogy might be able to increase a sense of belonging among students, which could be a really interesting outcome. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what OER-enabled pedagogy is, I think now. And so I do a lot of OER-enabled pedagogy in my courses, where we're incorporating development of the OER into the classwork and assignments themselves. And this is a form of a non-disposable assignment or a renewable assignment, so that the work that the students do lives on past their attendance in the course or their enrollment in the course. So as an overall approach, it's been shown that OER-enabled pedagogy is perceived positively by students. And some ideas for OER-enabled pedagogy assignments that I currently offer students are, and they can range from very small to very, very in-depth. And so, you can imagine giving students some participation points for using hypothesis to point out errors, in the OER. I don't think that one's on here, but creating a glossary entry, reviewing and editing a chapter, developing a whole new chapter. Some of these are kind of specific to the statistics class that we were doing. So converting a lab activity from one statistics software to another, testing a new one. You always got to test them. Ooh, we run into some issues. Writing a review and suggesting changes. And so getting some, editorial skills here. Developing practice questions with an answer key for a chapter. So this activity was actually proposed by a student in my class this year, and she's doing that as part of her coursework for my class. And then some of these fit for my classes because we have a technical piece. So writing a how-to for adding and editing content that might not be appropriate for every class, but there's some of my outcomes I hope students are getting more comfortable with computers and technology. And then actually adding content that maybe is created by the student themselves, or they could work collaboratively with another student, where one student who maybe is less interested in the technical side of things generates the content, and then the second student actually puts it into the resource. And yeah, I have rubrics for these assignments and that are freely available. There's a link here. I can make sure everybody gets the links if they're interested, so that these can be fairly easy to assess as well. And so I want to share a little bit about some upcoming OER-enabled pedagogy research that I'm involved in. And this is a collaboration with Connor Barker here, who's at Mount St. Vincent University, and James Hughes in computer science at StFX. And so James has a lot of his course materials already freely available. So things like his lectures are on YouTube and that kind of thing. And so we're hoping to incorporate his course into a future round of the research, although his course is not in the current plan for this kind of first round. But for my piece of this research, I'm going to be teaching a new cognitive neuroscience course at StFX. So it'll be taught for the first time in the winter. It's a third-year course. This is me teaching cognitive neuroscience, but that's my brain. So it's basically a course on brain imaging. And there are commercial textbooks available for cognitive neuroscience, but they don't cover the material in the way that I want to cover it. And so most of the commercial textbooks will tell you about the different methods for brain imaging, and then tell you about the different cognitive functions and how they're represented in the brain. So this is how memory works in the brain. This is how attention works in the brain. They don't really dig into some of the bigger issues, like the sort of social justice aspect of cognitive neuroscience. There's a lot of like racism in the history of cognitive neuroscience. You can kind of trace it all the way back to what's that one with the lumps on the skull? Phrenology, right? Like looking at the different bumps on the scalp or skull to justify slavery. Like that's kind of where cognitive neuroscience was born from. And I think if we don't kind of acknowledge some of that history, we're really doing a disservice to our students and perpetuating a larger injustice. Also things like open science. So for being at a small rural, primarily undergraduate institution, my students are not going to be doing a ton of MRI data collection, right? We don't have a research MRI where they can go and try it out and run a study. But there's a ton of freely available MRI databases out there that I want to incorporate how to use those databases and why they're so interesting and valuable right into the textbook, things like that. So the plan is to collaboratively develop the textbook with students using OER-enabled pedagogy. So students will get course credit as well as author or contributor credit, as as appropriate, depending on their contributions. And the student perspective will be built right into the OER from the ground. So we'll start with an outline, chapter outline. This is what needs to get covered. Here's some lectures and discussions that I recorded from a seminar course last year and some references to get you started. But we're going to be really building this textbook collaboratively with the students. And then Connor Barker is going to be doing a similar project with his course in school psychology at Mount St. Vincent. It's a little bit different because there is no undergraduate textbook in school psychology available. This is not a course that's typically offered at the undergraduate level. There's a bit of more of a challenge there in terms of finding appropriate resources. Where there are cognitive neuroscience textbooks, they're just not quite right for what we want to do. They're really starting from nothing, total blank slate in this sort of sub project. And I just want to point out that Connor's collaborating with the Writing Center and the library and the Teaching and Learning Center at Mount St. Vincent University. And so there's a lot of, I think, opportunities for some of these offices at universities to get involved and just enable OER use and OER-enabled pedagogy. So the question that we're really asking is, what do students perceive to be the educational value of contributing to the OER in an advanced undergraduate course relative to traditional teaching approaches? And this is more or less a novel question in that most existing research focuses more on more intro courses, or doesn't really say what level of course the students were involved in. A lot of the research that's available kind of collapses across a lot of courses. So we're looking specifically at advanced courses, which I think is interesting, both because the material might be more complex. So that might be a challenge for students, but also the students are more advanced. And so they might have some more awareness of the benefits of active learning. So I think it's worthwhile to look specifically at advanced undergraduates as a research question. And we're adapting survey questions from an existing study by Hilton and colleagues. So just to give you a flavor for what we're going to ask the students, things like, how did participating in this course's OER development help you master core academic content compared to the way engaging in traditional learning activities like writing essays or taking quizzes would have? Suppose that certain types of learning activities lead to certain learning outcomes. For example, reviewing flashcards might lead to memorizing facts. What type of learning outcomes do you think are the result of participating in this course's OER development? And then this came up in previous research, so I think it'll be important to check in. Did you feel pressured to license your work in a certain way? So how can we make sure that as students are comfortable, kind of contributing to open education, because we want to, again, maintain that this is an inclusive activity. And I think those of us who are kind of up at the front of the room feel so strongly that it's valuable. We just have to balance that with students' comfort level a little bit, or at the very least ask about it and then feel badly that we did in fact pressure them to license their work in a certain way. And then I think, then again, this is really fresh on my mind, but I think I'd like to incorporate some questions or a measure on sense of belonging. I think that could be an interesting and novel contribution to the area. We certainly got a little bit of an indication from our hackathon that could be a benefit of OER-enabled pedagogy. So we have a few minutes, but maybe we can take some questions first, and then we could have a go at trying to find an open educational resource that you might be able to use in your classes. But should we break for questions first? Yeah. Okay.
I think that sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Erin. We'll do questions now. You can put up your hand virtually with the button on Zoom. You can flip on your camera and put up your hand, or you can write a question in the chat, and I will read it out if you don't care to have your camera or microphone on. I do have one question to start, which comes from, please forgive me if I mispronounce, Umida or Umida, or maybe something else, about peer review and OERs. I don't know if you would care to ask the question out loud, or I can just read out the question you wrote in the chat a while ago.
Sure, you can read. Yeah.
Sure. Asked, I know that OERs are not peer reviewed. However, is there a place that informally evaluates these resources?
I mean, it's a good question. So the students, the students that are reading them are definitely evaluating them and telling us, you know, if they're up to the quality level. That's certainly a trade-off, and it's something actually that Jen Stamp discusses really well. Jen has more experience working with a commercial textbook publisher. I've never done that, and so, but I think it just comes down to a trade-off. So the you know, errors still get left, you know, in a peer-reviewed textbook, and then you can't change them until the next edition. You just have to look at them over and over and over again, right, until they finally update the edition. No, I think the collaborative approach to developing them is another way, but in terms of getting like an actual external reviewer, I don't think that I haven't come across it. Maybe someone in the chat knows. Yeah, but yeah, Jen is agreeing in the chat that students are more engaged in the process than someone who's maybe paid to make a review. And yeah, I totally agree. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be errors. Also, sometimes there's things that you can't control, even though you feel like you do have more control over an open educational resource. So like Sherry and they just updated one of the packages that we use to publish the lab manual, and it just looks uglier now on the website. and you know, and so we have to figure out what's wrong with that. There's going to be some mistakes, it's going to, but you have an opportunity to fix it faster.
Jennifer says yes, that you acknowledge that there are mistakes and invite students to look for them, which is great, yes, as opposed to putting the textbook up as a kind of like infallible voice. And Tracy talks about trying to get engaged practitioners to review an OER that they are creating in nutrition and aging. That's terrific.
Yeah, I like that too. Yeah, and kind of stressing to students that it's a living document that can change. Yeah.
Tony's put up their hand. Tony, would you like to ask a question?
I'm going to try. There, my video came out. Oh gosh, when you see yourself in the camera, you go, ooh, and yeah. It's one of those days. I guess you've seen probably in the chat, I'm a bit of a fan of OERs already. And in fact, one of the things I guess I wanted to say more than ask about is that it's important to keep sort of looking. So for example, I was looking for an open educational resource on a topic, and I couldn't find anything that I really wanted. So I ended up going with a commercial textbook, but I just last week was looking and found a fantastic new one for my human sexuality class. And it's even better than the commercial one. And I always find typos, always in any commercial textbook. I've yet to find, I mean, I make typos too, you know, but so, you know, it's nice to be able to fix them quickly rather than sort of say to the students, if you find a typo and tell me, I'll give you a bonus point, which I say.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I guess the other thing is, do you have any experience? I don't have as much experience doing this. So I've experienced using like full textbooks and even, you know, I have a background in actually coming up with ways to describe open educational resources in a previous job. but have you had any experience using discrete, like sort of learning objects, which essentially can be smaller, like simulations or smaller pieces, and integrating those into any of your, say, labs or lessons or anything like that? I mentioned Merlot in the chat, for example, and also mentioned the Open MIT, and I've used Open MIT to look at course outlines, for example, and gather things, but just curious about that.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. Again, like this is not just free textbooks. And so I've been involved in, for example, it was an activity hosted by the Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science in a couple of course outlines and syllabi. So we designed a course on data management collaboratively, and we created a syllabus for research methods, psych research methods in which we tried to decentralize whiteness, for example. And then there's also, all of mine are going to be stats and psych oriented. There's also Open Stats Lab, where there's a lot of like freely available, like kind of chunked stats activities that you can also do like right on their website. But yeah, I think keeping an eye out for those is really good. And I wish that there was a better way to find them, because sometimes these things are hard to find and there's not a great super searchable database. Where there's one being developed in psych called the OER Commons, and it's like an OER of OERs. It's getting a little bit meta. So I wonder if we have to do those things like within discipline, or I'm not sure, but yeah, a lot of really good resources, with the trick just being that they're not always like within arm's length when you need them.
Super. Thank you for that great question, Tony. Thank you for all the resources you put in the chat. For those of you watching on YouTube, I'm going to try and put these links in the description. So hello from the past. Jennifer, I see your hand next if you'd like to ask a question.
I don't know if I'm asking a question, but I have to teach soon. I have so many ideas. First of all, thanks, Erin, for this. This is so fantastic. I just wanted to talk about a hack, because one of the things is that the support for developing OERs is really lagging behind the enthusiasm for it. And I can see, in particular, Umida, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, because if you don't have, and I'll put this in the chat as a strategy, if you're interested in OER and you don't have any money, but you're teaching the same course over and over again, and in particular, I tried this for an upper level course like Erin's doing, then what you can do is, I did a super low stakes assignment. It was basically just participation points. And I told the students to choose something. I actually got them to pick a learning outcome and find some alternative that is open source. So they had to check the licensing and stuff, and I posted some stuff for them to learn about it. And they had to compare what they found that was open access with what was existing in the text. And that was actually, I learned more from that than anything else. But I just forgot about it, and I kept it running for a few years. Now I have almost enough to do, if I had the time. I guess that it still comes down to finding the time to collate these resources. But even if, students really don't care so much how ugly something is if it's free, like, worrying about how it looks and stuff. I mean, it's, you're more proud of it if it, if it looks professional. But I basically have this spreadsheet now of alternatives, and I've sent it to a publisher and told them, like, this is what you did, because I also couldn't get text at 2020, and that's one of the reasons that we changed.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take off, but I just wanted to share this link in case anybody wanted it, just to show you how I've organized it. But it was an afterthought. It was an easy thing to do, and you could just, you can just keep it there and not use it. And then if you get a sabbatical, or decide to stop sleeping or something, you can actually turn this into something. And the students are way more engaged in their learning than I was. A paid reviewer, I couldn't care as much about their marks as they do. So, I think you do have to change the way that you think about learning, and the students know tons, and especially too with all of these initiatives to increase inclusivity and diversity. We're not asking the students what they want. I think this is great. So thanks very much for that. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you,
Jennifer.
Awesome.
Are there any other questions for Erin? I have one, which is that OERs feel a little overwhelming for me. I'm a precarious teacher. I often get my gigs a few weeks before the course starts, and so I wonder if you have thoughts about what and I work in theater, so it's a very different world. But just for in broad sense, for people who would love to engage with this, but it feels like it's always a panic to put a course together. Do you have any thoughts, or maybe from the audience, about small steps that you can take in order to gain some of the benefits from OERs?
Yeah, so I don't think I would not tell, a limited term appointment teaching a course that they've already taught to go find a new OER when they're happy with their textbook. It's too much work. It's too much work. But so the opportunities, I think, come in, and I've got it on the slide here, when you're doing something new anyway, right? So I would wait until, that you're doing something new, the textbook isn't working. Like I don't think that, it's sort of if it's not broke kind of situation. And it's really not the responsibility of precariously employed instructors to lower costs for students like that. Like there's so many other places, in the things that we spend money on in post-secondary where we can, like, that shouldn't be on the shoulders of precariously employed instructors. So I would definitely always have it in the back of your mind, and how, if you're going to reach out to a publisher and say, hey, what new textbooks are there, like Google first and look for OERs first. But I just want to acknowledge it is work. And I think the reason that this has worked for me is because I was new and I had not taught before at all. And so it was going to be too much work no matter what I did. And so that, I kind of channeled that into open educational resources. But yeah, it's a lot of work.
Okay, that's great. In a way, that's okay, because I've taught 25 courses, but only once did I teach a course I'd ever taught before. So,
Yeah, right. So if it's something new, yeah, I would definitely have a look. And I don't think, especially that, like Jen mentioned too, in 2020, it was hard to get textbooks, period. So it's one of those, the barrier caused the solution kind of situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Birdie, I see your hand. Would you like to ask something or add something?
I would. I'm curious. I'm trying to wrap my head around this, and so one of the things that I've started to do to try to reduce is I tried to go the course pack route through the bookstore, and that ended up, for 2 chapters out of a textbook, it ended up being a third of the price of the whole textbook, which my students put together for me. I didn't, but anyway, I know it was a nightmare. But what I've started to do now is I've got a couple textbooks, and I take 1 chapter from each textbook and put them together, and then supplement with peer-reviewed journal articles, which is challenging because they're not written at the kind of survey course level kind of deal. But and I also supplement with like YouTubes and all this kind of stuff. So how is what I'm doing different from what you're saying? Because I like what you're saying, but I'm trying to understand.
Yeah. So those textbook chapters are copyright.
Right. But I can do like 10% or 1 chapter, and it feels a little unethical. But technically I'm not breaking any kind of rule.
No, it's not unethical. So that's not the part I meant at all. The part that's different is you can't edit them.
Right.
So yeah, you're allowed to use whatever your librarian says and copy that into your course pack. But then if you say, that's missing a section on social justice, or where's the Indigenous perspective, you can't edit that. And so that's the difference. But I think that where you could make that an OER is you could share a list of your materials, right? Like you could have an open syllabus, and of course you acknowledge you can't share it. Maybe you can't publicly share the chapters themselves, but a list of the materials and where you got them. And then you do have kind of a OER light where people could change the chapters that they select or whatever, but it provides this really nice framework for someone coming in to, strap on the jetpack and teach a course similar to yours. Yeah, great question. And that, I think the librarians, and I see Margaret's got her hand up. It's a good segue. But they can be a huge help for understanding those copyright and license issues. Yeah.
Go ahead, Margaret.
I wasn't planning to respond to the copyright question, but generally the other difference would be that because you do not have access to the copyright, you couldn't put it into an OER platform such as the AtlanticOER, because then people who don't have access to the book where the 10% applies, which your students would, because you likely have it through the library or the course pack.
Yeah, I was suggesting that they put a link to the material and then the person would need their license or their access to their library. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
But what I wanted to say was just offer another perspective on how non-permanent faculty or faculty developing a course could use OERs. So for example, I'm a librarian, so I don't teach a class, but I go in and I teach multiple classes. The biggest motivation for me to make an OER last year was that I was teaching a lot of distance nursing students individually because their whole course through StFX was asynchronous. So, and I didn't really have the opportunity to go in and teach them like I normally do. I guess I could have recorded a video, but then the AtlanticOER was available and I thought, oh, this would be great. And then I also submitted a practicum proposal to the University of Toronto. So I had a librarian student create the OER for me based upon what I teach nursing students. So then I was able to give all the distance nursing students the OER, which was essentially the presentation that I would give in their class. My plan is to expand it, but that's time.
Yeah, and Margaret, we had also talked at one point, you were going to contribute a chapter to my OER on how to help students find their own data, but maybe that is the chapter you're talking about, but for nursing students.
Oh, no, it's not. It's not at all. But yeah, that would still be really interesting.
Yeah, because Margaret is our data librarian here at StFX. So that, and a really great fit into statistics is because when students can find their own data to analyze, then they're asking their own questions and hopefully they're actually interested in the answers, which is where we seem to run into trouble.
Thank you very much, Erin. We have a couple minutes left. Does anyone else want to ask a question?
Yes,
Jenna, go ahead.
Hi, this has been so wonderful to listen to this, particularly as someone who's working on a fellowship application around open educational resources. I'm taking furious notes at the moment, but from you folks, I was wondering, so I was just thinking about like some steps that some folks could take towards offering OER without, like making some small changes without, because, many of us have pre-established resources or might be a bit pressed for time. And so something that I do pretty frequently, and I'm wondering if maybe there's barriers about this that I don't know about, or this might be specific to my resources, which is that I link students to textbooks that are held by the library in ebook format. And I think that there's only a small catalog of books that you can do this through, but I was just wondering if that was like sort of considered an option as an intermediary between, because personally, I don't ask students to buy textbooks because I teach at the community college level, and it's just, most folks are not going to be doing that. They're just not going to be able to. We also don't have a ton of textbooks that are appropriate for the class. So what I tend to do is link to a bunch of different textbooks using a sort of e-proxy URL. And I think that not that many books necessarily can do that, but I was just wondering about that technique, if that's something that you guys use or recommend, or if there's some troubleshooting around that we can come, because I have had sometimes technical issues around it. So I wanted to hear about whether that is an option.
Yeah, I really like that approach. I think, to make it so that it would be an open list of resources that another professor at another institution with different licenses might use. Yeah, you just want to be careful about the particular links that you use. But there are more and more textbooks available in e-format that libraries have holdings of that makes this kind of more and more feasible. Yeah, but I know like the proxies get messy and students don't always know how to log into them or why they're logged in sometimes and not other times. I have that question often.
I have that question. Yeah.
Today.
I don't know why it needs to be so busted.
Yeah. So I think that's a challenge that we like when it is an actual like standalone OER where all the content is in one
Yeah.
place. But yeah, no, I think that's a totally feasible thing that just takes a little bit of troubleshooting. Thanks, Margaret. And yeah,
Margaret, do you have a secret sauce? Is there a secret password? How do we do this?
get your librarian to test it out for you and make sure that it should work for every student and work while they're off campus, you know, like
Right,
those
yeah.
things. Yeah, but great idea. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a
My
great,
secret sauce is that I'm the systems librarian at StFX. So I'm the one that
Perfect.
does this.
Aha, okay.
well, this has been really terrific. Thank you so much, Erin, and thank you everyone for joining us today.